starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to Repro Action's first Act and Learn webinar of the year. Tonight's topic is All the President's Men, Understanding Donald Trump's Anti-Abortion Clique. We're so glad that you're here. First, I'll get started with your hosts. The first voice you're hearing is myself, Erin Matson. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Repro Action, and I'm based in Arlington, Virginia.
And I am Pamela Merritt. I am the other co-founder and co-director of Repro Action, and I'm based in St. Louis, Missouri.
Great. So first, I'm just going to get started by going through the agenda. First, we'll introduce Repro Action. We'll do an overview of Trump's cabinet picks. Then we'll dig in with our panelist, Ally Boguhn, who's the political and campaigns editor at Rewire. We're so excited she's with us tonight. We'll go through next steps and then Q&A. At any point during the webinar tonight, feel free to put your questions in the chat box. We'll get to as many of them as possible at the end, so you don't need to wait until the end to do that. Great. So first, we'll start with Repro Action. So we're a new direct action group forming to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're proud of our left flank analysis and our willingness to hold folks on all sides of the issue accountable, whether they're traditionally considered allies or opposition. We have a deep commitment to nonviolent direct action as one of the tactics we use to achieve our goals. And in terms of appointing the cabinet, what I want to highlight is that the confirmation hearings are currently underway, but the Senate cannot vote on nominees until after Donald Trump assumes the presidency on January 20th, this Friday afternoon. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has stated his goal of 7 cabinet nominees confirmed that same day on Friday. So briefly, and then I'm going to pass it to Pamela, and we're going to do a popcorn back and forth of some highlights, or shall we say lowlights, about the folks that we expect in the next administration. But the top line here is that this is the most anti-abortion administration expected in history, flanked by, and some examples of this are Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General nominee, Mike Pence, who is the Vice President, and Tom Price, who Trump has selected for Health and Human Services. And so Mike Pence, beginning in 2007, he sponsored the bill to defund Planned Parenthood. Mike Pence is the originator of the idea of let's shut down the federal government over Planned Parenthood, providing healthcare services to people around the country, including using federal funds. In 2013, as governor of Indiana, Pence began slashing funding of Planned Parenthood. By 2014, it had been cut nearly in half. And as a result of that, that also resulted in his draconian cuts both to Planned Parenthood as well as to a needle exchange program, resulted in HIV infections spiking in the state of Indiana. And Mike Pence is the poster boy, along with Donald Trump, for punishing women who have abortions. When Donald Trump said during the course of the campaign that he would look at punishing women who have abortions, Mike Pence has come back and said, Donald Trump and I would never support legislation that punished women who made what he calls the heartbreaking choice to end a pregnancy. And what I want to highlight about this is that actually Mike Pence, like I said, he's the literal embodiment of punishing women who have abortions. As governor of Indiana, he presided over the imprisonment of Priebus, a woman of color in Indiana who was imprisoned unjustly in a gross violation of her human rights for suspected abortion, self-abortion. So he's simply lying. And with that, I'll pass it to Pamela.
Thank you very, very much. So next up is Trump's pick for Health and Human Services, Tom Price. Tom Price opposed the Affordable Care Act entirely, the entire Affordable Care Act. Price is also a member of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, which is anti-abortion and anti-reproductive health care body that regularly testifies under the guise of medical expertise. Tom Price supported personhood, which we all know is incredibly controversial and indeed would have, as a piece of policy and legislation, would have negative impacts, not just on access to abortion, but also on access to reproductive technology in healthcare. Tom Price is opposed to funding Planned Parenthood, and Tom Price is opposed to federal funding for abortions. Erin?
Thanks. So next we'll look at Trump's pick for Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. So he has a long history of opposition to civil rights and racial justice initiatives of all kinds, and he failed to be confirmed by Republican majorities in the past due to some of the inflammatory comments that he has made. He had a 100% opposition voting record since his start in the Senate. He's been endorsed by the terrorist group Operation Rescue. Operation Rescue is headed by Troy Newman, and Troy Newman has called for the murder of abortion providers, and he is also served by Chief Federal Policy Advisor Cheryl Sullinger, who served multiple years in prison for attempting to bomb an abortion clinic. He was also the honorary co-chair of the Americans United for Life 40th anniversary gala. So what we want to highlight here is that this is part of an intertwined worldview, that we often see that racism and sexism and homophobia are part of a vicious circle that support one another. And in the person of Jeff Sessions, we see someone who has consistently opposed civil and human rights.
So next up is Trump's labor pick, Andrew Puzder, who I am incredibly familiar with because of his work in Missouri. Puzder is actually a graduate of Washington University Law School, which is based in St. Louis, Missouri. He authored the Missouri abortion law upheld by the Supreme Court in Webster v. Reproductive Health. And this is a critical case that allowed states to impose far more restrictions on abortion care than had previously been permitted under Roe v. Wade. This included limits on the use of public funds in facilities for abortion care. It's important to note that Puzder worked with a local anti-abortion lobbyist, Sam Lee, to move this piece of law through the state legislature, and the two of them actually got to know each other, as has been reported in many publications, by Puzder actually defending Sam Lee for getting arrested during sit-ins and protests at abortion clinics in Missouri. So Puzder also served on Missouri Governor John Ashcroft's abortion task force, which was titled the Task Force for Mothers and Unborn Children. Erin?
Thanks. So next we're going to take a look at Trump's education pick, Betsy DeVos. And so the DeVos family's donation to the Michigan Family Forum and Michigan Right to Life helped to pass Michigan's rape insurance law. Betsy DeVos' father helped to form the Family Research Council, which has been designated as a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, in part for its anti-LGBT activities. And she's also been connected with funding for pro-life candidates. I want to highlight that one of the things that DeVos is most widely known for is her support of diverting public education funds to unaccountable private charter schools and vouchers. And this also is an incredibly important issue when we talk about reproductive health rights and justice. And in particular, this is a mechanism of transferring funds from schools that serve all children to serving to schools that are actually religious institutions in many cases, using public dollars to fund religious activities, something that we should definitely be thinking about next week when the March for Life descends on Washington, D.C., and many of the children who attend that march are bused in from religious schools, often Catholic schools. And think about that they're having a day off of school, a Friday in this case, and diverting public funds for participation in religious activities. Pamela?
Some other positions within the Trump administration that are important to highlight regarding anti-abortion stances. Secretary of OMB Mick Mulvaney, Secretary of HUD Ben Carson, Secretary of Energy nominee Rick Perry, former governor of Texas, Administrator of the EPA Scott Pruitt, UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, and White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, and then Health Policy Aide Katie Talenko. So Trump's OMB pick, which is White House Budget Director, Mick Mulvaney is one of the founders and a hardline member of the House Freedom Caucus. And when we say hardline, that is the caucus that draws the hardest line and often derails processes. For example, he led the charge in 2015 to refuse a yes vote for any spending package that included funding for Planned Parenthood. Erin?
Thanks. So Trump's pick for housing and urban development is Ben Carson. Many of us remember Ben Carson, who ran for president in the last cycle. He has compared abortion to slavery, and I deeply encourage everyone interested in digging deeper into how offensive that argument is to read Imani Gandhi on Rewire, who's done multiple pieces covering that issue. He has stated forthrightly that he wants to overturn Roe versus Wade. He does not support abortion exceptions for rape and incest. And so again, he is a total hardliner. Pamela.
Thank you, Erin. So next up is Trump's energy pick, former Governor Rick Perry. Rick Perry signed a Texas law banning abortion after 20 weeks. And Rick Perry supported laws requiring that women see a sonogram, hear the fetus's heartbeat, and wait 24 hours before they can obtain an abortion. Erin.
All right, and then let's go to Trump's pick for Environmental Protection Agency, who's also anti-abortion and supported restrictions on medication abortion during his time in the Oklahoma legislature. Pamela.
And we've clearly got a theme. Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus, is quoted as saying, I think the Republican Party platform is pretty clear on those subjects. Life begins at conception, and the 14th Amendment rights apply to unborn children. Reince also declined to commit to Trump's call to allow abortion in cases of rape, incest, in the life of the mother.
And Trump's health policy aide pick, Katie Talenko, has claimed that birth control causes abortion, miscarriages, and limits the ability to have children in the future, which is a total lie. So, some of the shriek pieces she has written in the Federalist, a conservative publication, include miscarriage justice is big pharma breaking your uterus. And ladies, is birth control the mother of all medical malpractice? And let me tell you, the short answer is no.
Thanks, Erin. And so the final member of the administration before we move into the interview phase is Trump's ambassador pick to the United Nations, Governor Nikki Haley. The current governor of South Carolina is a long-term opponent of abortion rights, and in May of 2016 signed a bill that would restrict abortion after just 20 weeks. Erin.
All right. So as you can see, we have a group of hardliners who are coming into power, and the country is changing rapidly. So let's unpack this a bit with Ally Boguhn, who is the political and campaigns editor for Rewire. She previously worked as an associate research director at Media Matters for America, specializing in analyzing media representations of reproductive rights and health. She was also previously a contributing writer at Everyday Feminism, and she's on Twitter at Ally Boguhn. And Ally, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Ally, will you unmute yourself for me, please?
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes. Great. Thank you so much. So thanks so much for joining us tonight. So the first question, I know that you are much closer to this than almost anyone in the country looking at this angle. And so my first question for you is, taking a look at the Trump cabinet nominations, what do you think that people should understand about their approach to reproductive health rights and justice issues? And to put it one way, I mean, you know, we often think of a changeover from a Democratic to a Republican administration usually comes with certain things with regards to abortion and reproductive health care. So I wanted to ask you, you know, not just what do you think people should understand about the cabinet nominations and picks, but also, is this just a typical switchover to a Republican administration, or do you believe something more is going on here?
Yeah, well, I think the most important thing to keep in mind here is that we're seeing a clear shift away from evidence and fact-based policymaking and policymakers. Now, I do think it's fair to say that a lot of this is based in the GOP's overarching ideology. So we already saw party members who, of course, don't base their policies on sound science or medical practice. So we see climate change deniers and willingness to disregard medical science in anti-choice bills. But Trump's cabinet is really taking this to another level. We have this across the board with them. They seem to have roundly embraced an aversion to factual evidence and science in really alarming ways. And I think one of the most striking examples of that is likely incoming Health and Human Service Secretary, Rep. Tom Price. And as you guys mentioned earlier, he has gotten a lot of press for his anti-choice ideology, and he did say that, for example, he thought not one woman could not afford contraception. But just as alarming is his membership in the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, which Pamela mentioned is a fringe medical association. And they promote false links between abortion and breast cancer, anti-vaccination claims, and other positions that are not grounded in medical science. So this sort of denial of facts and evidence that you would think and hope are really key to policymaking are things that are being completely disregarded by this cabinet.
Yeah, and I'd love to dig into that just a little more because, you know, the denial of facts and evidence. So it's repeatedly was a charge during the Bush administration years that there was a war on science, right? And that there was a disavowal of scientific evidence. And we even saw some of that happening during the Obama years, particularly on emergency contraception and some of the malfeasance with the FDA and going back and forth and overruling scientific evidence until that was rectified by a court. But I want to just ask, I mean, do you think that this rejection of science, this extreme rejection of science and fake science, I mean, how does this fit within the broader Trump, I would say both the campaign Trump brand, Trump methodology of willfully disregarding the facts and, you know, frankly, blatantly lying? Do you understand the question I'm asking? I mean, how does this fact denial on science and reproductive health care fit in with all of the other lies that we've seen? Because I think you could make an argument that there's a war on just information right now as well.
Definitely. I think that you saw during the Trump campaign, especially, the candidate completely unwilling to accept facts. A lot of that happened when he claimed that the election was being rigged against him, despite no evidence of that. And his refusal to accept the facts and his willingness to completely try to discredit things that we know to be true just persisted throughout the campaign. And that is still something we're seeing in his cabinet. So he started it when he was running for president, and now that he's going into office, he hasn't let up on that.
Yeah, it's a really big problem. So I want to pivot to this, you've been steeped in this from the campaign and well before that, covering reproductive health rights and justice issues. And I'd like to ask, what is most surprising or notable to you about the Trump picks for his administration?
I definitely think that the most notable thing is how really deep-rooted the anti-choice ideology is throughout the entire cabinet. All of the people he's nominating, all of the people he's choosing to bring on staff, they all share this really, really deep-rooted anti-choice ideology. And that seems kind of surprising, given that before he was elected, a lot of anti-choice groups were even questioning, does Trump really oppose abortion, given that at one point he said he was pro-choice, but now he seems to have roundly embraced it. Before he was elected, he had sent out in a letter to anti-choice leaders asking them to join him, and he promised a laundry list of priorities for them, including codifying the Hyde Amendment and defunding Planned Parenthood if they would join his team. And Trump and Pence have vowed to enact those policies on their first day in the White House, meaning like to start their anti-choice ideologies on the first day in the White House, and be advocates for that every day that they are in office. And it seems like they've really made good on that promise by putting together this list of cabinet picks and nominees. We've got people who have actually written anti-choice laws, like his Department of Labor pick, people who have signed them, like Rick Perry, former Texas governor, Ben Carson, who ran on his anti-choice platform, and we've got people like Kellyanne Conway, who will now be serving as his White House counselor. At Rewire, we just put out a piece that she has been advocating against abortion for over 20 years on with anti-choice groups, speaking at their events, going to events of that nature, and speaking on CNN and mainstream media about her opposition to abortion and pushing misinformation about that. So his group that he's choosing to surround himself with, really, they're all hardline anti-choice people, and that's really striking to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's something to consider here on Wednesday, the 18th, as we're bracing for impact on Friday, the 20th. But what you said about, every single day of the administration, it's likely that we're going to be confronting this in real time. And, right now it's a terrifying thing to sit there and brace for impact and think about how awful it's going to be. But the reality is that this means that real people and real lives are going to be hurt very soon. So I wanted to ask, pivoting from that, what, in your opinion, are the most effective steps ordinary people can take to protect access to healthcare in this new political climate? What should people listening to this webinar, either live tonight or in recording later, what should we be doing?
Yeah, one of my colleagues and I were actually just discussing this, and she said something that I think is really great, and that is that you should protect yourself first and foremost by arming yourself with knowledge. I know at Rewire we try to do evidence-based journalism to really give our readers useful background that they can apply to their everyday life and inform their activism, and make sure everything is based in the facts. So I think it's important to stay informed about the larger strategies at play here when it comes to efforts to roll back reproductive health care. That's why we run projects like the False Witnesses Project, which looks at the leading purveyors of medical misinformation in anti-choice groups. And politicians are using these people and their so-called science to push their anti-choice legislation and talking points. So being able to identify those people, and when they're speaking in the mainstream media, and really identify that these are discredited sources, these are discredited theories, and be able to call that out and make those arguments, I think is really important. And also to make the connections between all of these seemingly unrelated things that are happening. So for example, in March, we reported how the DeVos family were donating to anti-choice politicians and groups. And then in November, Trump announced that he would have her join his administration as his education secretary. So we're seeing how she really fits into a larger anti-choice framework and Trump building his anti-choice cabinet. And I think the last thing that's really important is to stay vigilant about where we're getting our information from. Like I said before, anti-choice groups may be citing evidence that isn't based in science, it's not based in fact. And being able to identify that when it happens is so vital.
Thank you so much, Ally. And I want to echo what Ally has said. Rewire is a fantastic evidence-based publication focused on reproductive health rights and justice, and much more than that, civil rights, human rights. And I really encourage everyone on this call to stay on top of Rewire. You can connect on their website. You can sign up for email newsletters, connect on social media, but it's really important, fearless reporting. And please tune into that. We consider their work very important to our work that we're doing as a direct action organization as well. We need to have the facts out there. So thank you so much. So please type in your questions for Ally in the chat box. We'll be moving to that shortly. So I'd like to encourage everyone on this call, in addition to following Rewire, which you should all be doing, we also encourage you to sign up for alerts at www.reproaction.org. If you get on our email list, you're not going to miss a darn thing. Also follow us on social media. We're Repro Action on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We also put up recordings of our webinars. So yes, there will be a recording of this call if you had friends who couldn't make it that you'd like to share it with. And we're really excited to announce our next Act and Learn webinar. We do these every single month to dig in deeper to topics, connect activists from across the country to talk about what's working and what's not, and much more. And our next Act and Learn webinar is going to be on February 28th from 7 to 8 Eastern. And we're going to be talking about how access to water is a reproductive justice issue. This is a really hot topic. What happened in Flint, Michigan is still very much going right now and remains a human rights concern and reproductive justice issue. And we'll also be digging into what happened with the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock and much more. So please save the date and plan to join us. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Pamela to lead the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Erin. This is super exciting. So again, please put your questions into the question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. I see that we've already got a question. I'm going to take moderator's privilege because I've got a question I'm just dying to ask, and then I promise, ask the questions in the box. One of the, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, Ally, but I'm just really curious about, I've heard a bunch of people and I've seen a lot of chatter online from folks who are kind of scoffing at the idea that the personal beliefs and track record of some of these cabinet positions and administrative roles actually is going to impact anything. They're like, it's just really about what Trump wants to do, and it's his ship. So one of the things that I thought was very striking watching the hearings was a discussion about with, I believe it was with DeVos, about sexual assault on campus as policy. Could you just talk a little bit more about some of the key cabinet roles or administrative roles that you think people might be overlooking the impact of somebody's view on abortion rights and reproductive rights, and how that can actually impact American policy going forward? And I'm also thinking about Nikki Haley as a nominee for UN.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of things that are being overlooked. For example, one of Trump's picks for ambassador for China is currently a governor, and when he vacates his office, his lieutenant governor will take place. And she has previously said that if abortion were illegal, she would be open. She suggested that essentially she would be open to prosecuting women who had an abortion. And she did not rule out the death penalty as a consequence. And those sorts of things those matter, and they are being overlooked. And then, of course, as you mentioned, there's positions like Betsy DeVos. During her hearing, they did mention campus sexual assault, and she refused to take a stance on whether she would stand by the Obama administration's 2011 guidance on Title IX. So we see a lot of these discussions aren't being had as much as we would maybe like to see, but every single one of these positions will impact everybody's lives. So it's important to really keep that in mind. Even positions that you might not think of as much, like Secretary of State, things of that nature, still, they get to weigh in, and they do have Trump's ear, and it's important to consider that.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Erin, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not much. Just I will say that these people can do tremendous damage in any agency. Someone who is opposed to reproductive health care, or for that matter, civil and human rights, can do tremendous damage in any perch. And I'm thinking about, even thinking locally to paint the picture a little bit more. Pamela, I was always shocked and appalled and frightened as hell by your outgoing / perhaps former by now state senator Kurt Schaefer, who intervened personally in a PhD student's dissertation at the University of Missouri that looked at the impact of restrictions on reproductive health care to health outcomes for people. And so, just thinking about how many different ways that a person can exact a vendetta against reproductive health care, to create real pain, to stifle academic inquiry, to chill global progress, to, it just goes on and on and on. And so it matters a great deal that Puzder, as our likely Secretary of Labor, has deep ties to Operation Rescue, right? That it matters a great deal in a business setting as well.
Thank you for that. So our first question, this is a tough one. This one's it's a series from Racine, and do pro-life people ever realize that they are not the ones directly affected by issues or hardships caused by pregnancy? Do they realize that they're imposing their beliefs onto women? And I'm going to take a first stab at that. The evil light of reality is that everybody living in every community is impacted by restrictions and hardships that are applied to pregnancy, and that means the entire all women who experience pregnancy and people who experience pregnancy who endure hardships. There's an impact for all of us, whether you are in favor of abortion rights or opposed to abortion rights. One of my big pet peeves is that we often get into debating the undebatable, and then the reality is that the hardships and the impact on our communities and on our society and on our ability to have communities that thrive and provide for everybody hits everybody regardless of where you stand on the issue. It's whether you want to do something about it or whether you want to contribute to it. But I've often had that same question, and I think that that's a question for that movement to answer. Did anybody else want to weigh in?
Go get it, Pamela.
Awesome. Thank you. So our next question is, thanks. Our next question is from Madison. What do you think about the idea of buying Plan B contraception in bulk and donating it to women's shelters? Ally, you want to weigh in on that one?
I'm not sure that's something I can speak to, really.
Okay. Erin, do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I've had some conversations with activists, and I understand there's a lot of enthusiasm about trying to ensure access to Plan B. And I'm really heartened and excited that people are seeing the importance of, trying to make sure that people directly have access to emergency contraception, particularly when, there's a lot of questions surrounding what's going to happen next to it. Here's what I've learned speaking with some experts on this topic, including Kelly Cleland, who is the executive director of the American Society for Emergency Contraception, who has previously served as a panelist on one of our previous webinars. So the mechanics of that are, I want to reflect, first of all, that the idea that you've provided about buying in bulk and donating it to women's shelters, that seems more tangible. What I've heard a lot of activist energy around is like, how do we buy it in bulk and then get it to people who need it? And logistically, that can be really complicated, particularly when you're talking about things like expiration dates and doing that, right? But if you have a specific place where you think that, it might be a population going there, such as women's shelters, that they might have higher rates of wanting to use it. I mean, I would say the first step, I just ask point blank if there's a local shelter that you have in mind, and ask them if they think that that's something that, their clients, that would be useful for their clients. What I will say about access to emergency contraception is that if you want to fight for access to emergency contraception, something more impactful that you might be able to do is actually fight on a policy level. And I want to highlight that specifically, it's been over 4 years now since the FDA has approved emergency contraception for sale, regardless of age or gender. So no restrictions for age or gender. You don't have to be a woman. You don't have to present as a woman. You don't have to show a photo ID. There's still and unfortunately, while over half of stores are now doing that, many are still not. And so something that you could do that could also be really effective, and we'd love to, help support people who are interested in this. It's something we're looking at as an organization, is, putting pressure on your local store to put emergency contraception on the shelf if they're not doing so. The other thing that I want to highlight is, it's, again, like, all activism is good, and love the enthusiasm, and check with your local shelter and see if that's something that would resonate and be helpful. But, another area that I just want to highlight is emergency contraception. Like, yeah, we're probably not going to see great advancements in policy on emergency contraception in the next 4 years. But when we talk about what's relatively safer, abortion is an area where we need to have extreme vigilance. So, thinking about access to contraception is certainly going to be challenged, and it's going to get a lot worse when you have picks like Tom Price saying that he doesn't know a single woman who has had trouble finding it, right, when it can be like over $100 to refill your standing prescription before the birth control benefit came into place. But just thinking about also donating your funds to abortion funds, this is such a critical area right now, and looking at abortion-specific advocacy as well could be really helpful. I hope that helps.
Thank you for that answer. So our next question is from Sarah, and the question is, will Repro Action or another organization create a concise tool for cataloging these anti-choice positions of Trump cabinet picks? Ooh, goodness. Erin?
Well, I can say that at Repro Action, we are certainly looking at other things that we can do. We'll be recording and sharing this webinar. We will continue to talk and beat the drum about the Trump administration. We have many things that we're considering in the works. But I also would love to hear from Ally just in terms of what Rewire is planning in terms of coverage, anything you could share for this person who's asked the question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
At Rewire, we're going to obviously be very vigilant about reporting on all of these picks for Trump's cabinet, and as they are confirmed, if they are confirmed, we will be vigilantly reporting on what they actually do when they take those positions. Right now, you can find all of those articles that we've already written through our tag on Trump's transition on our website. But aside from that, we're really going to be looking to hold all of these people accountable. That includes doing analysis and fact check working on all of them throughout their time.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's so exciting to have these, to have resources. So that was a great question. I want to take moderator privilege just one more time. And I'm really curious if when you're thinking about kind of what to look for for any signs of this, is it just going to be reflected in policy, or should this just be proactive activism, which is something that I tend to prefer, and I know reproaction, we prefer to like be proactive and make our voices heard and make activists' voices heard. But how important, Ally, do you think it is that folks not sit back on their heels when it comes to 2017 moving forward?
I mean, I think we're already seeing a lot of people get up and really taking action. When it came to Jeff Sessions, there was a lot of people speaking out against his anti-choice views and his opposition to the Violence Against Women's Act and other things of that nature. And for Betsy DeVos, we also saw a lot of advocates for addressing campus sexual assault issues speak out and use things like hashtag Dear Betsy. And those really make a difference. We saw a lot of media pick up from that, and these questions are being asked then of the nominees. Their positions and their records are really being held accountable. And I think that's a really great example of how doing the work and doing that activism is really making a difference already, and how it can impact the administration moving forward.
Thank you for that. So we have a question from Kim, and I'm just going to try to frame it as concisely as possible. But Kim, just talking broadly about, current non-supporters or pro-life advocates, was posing the comment that maybe reproduction education may possibly be key to gaining support, and whether they know the health detriments of pregnancy and birth and abortion, sharing statistics, and so forth, and ask the question, what efforts are being made in this regard? And so I just want to, I'll take a first stab at this again, which is that particularly when we're talking about from people who are in powerful positions or are conservatives elected to powerful positions, I take the position that a lot of these folks, it's not about whether they understand the facts. It's about whether they care about the facts. It's very hard in my home state of Missouri to argue that the infant mortality rate for Black infants is 3 to 4 times higher than their white counterparts. It's very hard to argue about the maternal mortality rates for women of color and for Black women in many states. I think Texas is just horrific on both infant and maternal mortality rates. So this isn't about, in most of my experience, when you get to people who are actually in power and are proposing policy or advocating policy, it's very rarely about them not understanding. Some of it is a little fake news. Some of it is that they have associations that give them really bizarre facts to back up the position they've decided to take for whatever reason. But a lot of it that we see on the state level is about a guaranteed voter mobilization tool in which you have a population that will do whatever you want them to do, as long as, even voting against their own best interests, as long as you slap a pro-life endorsement on it. And then the other thing is important to know is that that our concern as reproductive justice activists for the community, and a lot of people who might identify, is very different, in the sense that there's some people just don't care, and we have to acknowledge that there might be some biases that feed into that, particularly from a policy standpoint, and then that they don't, that it's not that they're not hearing the argument, they don't agree with the argument, and they've got their own sets of facts to back up that disagreement. But I do think that when we get out into the community, we have to, when we're doing activism, when we're talking to regular folks on the ground, facts are our greatest weapon, and that we can't surrender the arena to selective facts and faux news, and so I do think that there's always a role for education and always a role for facts, and that we should lead with the truth, and just know that sometimes when somebody says, I just don't believe in climate change, they really mean it. And sometimes when they say they don't believe in climate change, it is economically or politically advantageous for them to not believe it. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Sure. This is Ally. I think echoing what you said, Pamela, a lot of the times what we see is a willful disregard for the facts and the evidence. We see a cherry picking of data from a lot of politicians. I think a good example of this is the 20-week abortion ban based on fetal pain, which is not grounded in medical science or fact. So you can give the truth and the medical evidence as much as you want, but sometimes they just don't believe you. And I think that, at least in my role as a journalist, that's where accountability comes into play. It's really important to point out the discredited science and to hold people accountable for their positions when they aren't grounded in truth.
Thank you. Erin, you have anything you want to add?
I just want to remind folks that, there's been tons of research and polling about pro-choice, pro-life, and how the labels fit people, right, and don't fit people. But if you look, a couple things that I want to point out and lift up that, I think accountability is the most important word here, because, it's fewer than 20% of people in this country support banning all abortions. And that is what the pro-life movement, the people who are using the term pro-life, to lobby policymakers, the people who are in this new administration, that is what they're pursuing. And they do not have the support of the people on that. And so that's really important, number one. And number two is, regardless of labels, when you look at the data on what people want an experience to be like for a woman who has decided to have an abortion, overwhelming majorities, they want her to have medically accurate care. They want her to be free from harassment. And so the agenda that goes with the label doesn't have near as much support as they try to make it out to have.
Thank you for that. So do we have any more questions regarding the topic of Trump's, I can't even say it, of Trump's cabinet and incoming administration? Please drop them into the question chat, and we will get those over to Ally. And while we wait, Ally, is there anything else you wanted to add? Or Erin, did you have any questions? I've asked a couple.
I just want to ask Ally, you have generously shared your time and knowledge with us tonight. How can our Repro Action supporters support Rewire?
Yeah, you can support us by signing up for our email list and sharing our work. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook, and head on over to our website at rewire.news.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And did you also mention Twitter?
We are on Twitter. I don't know the handle off the top of my head. I believe it's just Rewire News.
Rewire News, yes. So thank you for that. So I join Aaron's chorus of praise for Rewire. They're a tremendous resource, and often I'll pull up a Rewire article on a topic, and then kind of wade through other news on the same exact thing, and it really does help kind of give you an awesome check on what the facts are, and when you're consuming other news. So it's going to be incredibly important moving forward. So here's a question from Jay, and this is for Ally. Any advice, any advance info about the Supreme Court battle? How much of a danger is Roe in? Thank you, Jay.
Well, Trump is expected to, or he says he is going to announce his pick for the Supreme Court by the end of January, so just a week or two after inauguration. And he actually has met with some of those people that he has said he is considering within the last week. And he has released a list of his potential picks, and they were approved by the Heritage Foundation, which is an anti-choice organization. So we do see, and he also says he will appoint a justice, keeping in mind that he wants Roe to be overturned. So, I mean, that's a real and actual threat to Roe, something that we definitely should be vigilant about.
Thank you. Aaron, anything you want to add to that?
Hey, we're going to need you to take direct action with us, everyone, on this call. That's all I have to add on that. Hey, get ready for direct action.
Yes, absolutely. I could not agree more. So I'm just going to wait a few more minutes to see if we have questions on tonight's topic. This has really been a really great kind of overview, and I speaking for myself, when we first started wading into this topic, I knew the people I knew, but I didn't know the people I didn't know. So some of these names were not familiar to me. So it was a really fascinating process to really figure out kind of who the players are, and I think, you know, we want to arm ourselves with as much information and tools going forward as possible. And while we wait to see if there's any questions on the topic, I will add that this is a very useful exercise to do if you are interested in your local like state level drama. I know we very much so focus on the Trump administration that is coming in, but your state governments have, most state governments, not all, have also got new administrations coming in, and conservative anti-abortion control of state legislatures is really like a big giant map across a lot of this country. I think it's in the high 30s, and I apologize for not knowing the precise number, but I do know that they have administrations as well where people have power and influence. So it's pretty good idea to do basic research. If you're interested in doing activism at your state level, research is a really good way to start, so that you know kind of who the players are, not just who the public faces, but who are the people who have that person or that group's ear, and both externally and internally. So, and there's great resources, but I've found it really awesome to kind of basic Google search and news search and from local news outlets, and it's amazing what you can find out about people and what organizations they're affiliated with. All right, so I'm not seeing any more questions. And we do love to be prompt. We've got about 5 minutes. Ally or Erin, any final thoughts?
Thank you, Ally.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. This has been great, and I think we can wrap up. So before everybody hangs up the phone, just one more time, please do check us out at reproaction.org, and follow us on Twitter at reproaction, Facebook at reproaction as well, and we will see you in the streets. Thank you so much, Ally, and thanks, Erin, as always.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.